So is that okay, or do you want? I don't think I can move this much further over.
No, I think if you move it, no, that's
Okay,
just set.
this is fine.
Okay, do you want to start with that backwards to the numerical slide? Yeah, Haley's helping us, so.
Oh yeah, let's go back.
Okay, so we're just going to go back
Just to present
to a slide that didn't.
Yeah.
No,
Just
one
before-
more, I think.
Just before that. There we go. Okay, so we're just gonna probably keep this one a little bit kind of more casual and just have some general reflections about public engagement, building research capacity, community surface learning. So kind of a broad, the themes that we were listening to today, and a lot of it's been covered. So I might try to avoid some things in the interest of repetitive or not being too repetitive. But before I do that, I do want to just present some of the basic numbers. So this is an idea that kind of was born out of something over Christmas holidays for a course I was going to teach in January. So it was very quickly developed. And it was the same thing. It was kind of, there's a lot of fear, and I had to tell the students, I don't know how this is going to turn out as it turns out, but I have your back. I know if you're working towards the product, even if it falls apart, I'll be grading your effort, not the product. And it turned out to work out really well. So it was there's really no reason to worry. A lot of things just kind of fall in place. So from there, I think I went on sabbatical, so I didn't do anything for a year, or at least no teaching anyways. And then we did it for about 3 years in a row now, I think.
It's my second year.
Yeah. So that includes 5 instructors. That would include Jordan, one who's retired, but the other 4 who are doing it and continuing to do it. So I think there's a certain sustainability there. 225 students, I would estimate, did that community service learning. We're part of a group, typically of 5 people, 3 to 5. So a lot of people and a lot of organizations, close to 40 organizations. And in terms of the scale up, it is obviously more limited because there's a lot more support. You're basically doing a supervision in many ways with a bachelor student instead of what we typically do with graduate students. But there were still 32 people involved in that. So, and you can see the accomplishments. I'm not going to list them all, but it was very successful for getting grants and for moving things into professional publications and other kinds of intangibles as well, including interesting conference presentations that people are taking home and people are watching online. I should point out that we're recording this, but for legal reasons, we won't be recording the comments because that's we can record the speakers, but the comments might be a little bit difficult to do. So there'll be some editing, but they will be made available. It will be a website, but we'll probably start with a Google Drop. So if people are interested, they can always. We might send out through people's emails if they signed up, just what we're doing moving forward, including our presenters as well. So talk soon about that. But let's get into the discussion at hand. Does that sound good? Mm-hmm. I think I have Julia, Fred, me for 4 themes. So there's going to be some kind of movement.
All right. And thank you again, Haley. And hopefully, it will become clear. Oh. I am horrible at staying close to the mic. Okay, Fred, let's get cozy.
Yeah.
All right. Relationship building. Relationship building is, to me, the heart of community and university engagements. And I'd like to begin by reflecting a bit on positionality. And some of you in the room don't even know who I am. My name is Julia. I'm a white settler and a second-generation familial member to the unceded territories of this island. I'm a mom. I'm a deep, cold water swimmer. And those are just a few of my identities. But what I really want to illustrate with my own fluidity of identities is what I find a really false and divisive binary between academia and community. For example, I started as community. I was a social worker doing community practice, organizing alongside various communities. And one of the things that we did was we partnered with the University of Toronto in this case to do participatory action research with psychiatrized folks living without housing, and older women who had experienced abuse. So I come into this conversation with that entry point of being community and located in community. I moved from that into my doctoral program, where I was, of course, student, and my doctoral work, which informs my reflections today, actually looked at, on the ground, the social relations between community and universities when they engage primarily in research collaborations. So there I was a student, and now, fairly recently, I locate myself in academe. I'm a fairly recent assistant professor at the School of Social Work. And so this idea that I could locate myself either in the academy or in community, it doesn't work for me, and it doesn't work for me now. And I think that I've seen that, and I particularly will focus on students. Students come into doing this community partnered work with multiple identities too. I think Jordan pointed out that many of them have contested relationships as service users with the very agencies that they might be partnering with. They may have worked for them in the past, done a placement with them, and so they come with a lot of tensions around those multiple identities, and I think we really have to think about how that informs our relationships in doing this kind of collaborative work. And I would like to add to that, to further complicate the notion of locating ourselves within sort of the research as either in the academy or in community or being a student, is that often what we don't talk about is our social locations within those various positionalities. And that's where I think it gets really complicated when we talk about racialized students and Indigenous students, differently abled students who have to navigate relationships in much more complex ways. And I think in our gestures and our intentions towards having equitable relationships, we tend to erase that we live in a deeply uneven social world, and that doesn't stop in the context of these collaborations. So that's probably the main point I want to make around social relationships and where I come from in this discussion. I also want to just highlight that I think a lot of these complexities can be mediated by establishing shared understandings from the beginning about our very different priorities in these collaborations, and we all come with them, and I don't think we have to reach consensus. I think we can articulate them and try our best to satisfy multiple different priorities within those relationships. And I'm going to stop there and invite my colleague Fred.
I feel like Jimi Hendrix at Woodstock. He came on in the morning, hardly anyone left, right? He said, "I see you're still here." I thought that we were going to be speaking to students, and clearly most students are gone. Mm-hmm. But I should tell a story. Jordan, I was impressed with your presentation about the awkwardness of students dealing with the bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. A lifetime ago, in another lifetime, when I got a BA, I went back to Labrador and Nunavut, and government hired me immediately to say, "Oh, we got a university graduate from this part of the world." And they hired me as a community development officer, and part of my job was to go out to the communities, mostly Inuit communities, but a couple of Mushwa Innu. And my job was to find out what the communities wanted, what kind of development things they wanted to see happening in the communities. And I did that, and I'd come back and I'd explain, this is what people are saying, this is what they'd like to see happening, these kinds of things. And I kept running into, there's no policy for that. There's no policy for that, right? I mean, I since learned, well, let me continue. Finally, I tired of hearing this, and I said, well, let me write the policy. I could, I know the issues, I know what's going on. Oh, no. Intergovernmental Affairs is responsible for writing policy. So I said, well, okay, introduced me to them. So they flew me out here to St. John's, took me up into the Confederation building, into the unit, Intergovernmental Affairs. I went in there and met this fellow, this guy, this is back in the early 1970s, I'm dating myself, but there he was younger than me at the time, wearing a three-piece suit, smoking a pipe, and writing policy for the indigenous communities in Labrador. And I said, oh, this is not going to work for me. So I said goodbye, and I came back to the university to do a NMA in anthropology, which I did. But I ran short of money and applied for and got a job working at a place called Emmanuel House, which is a treatment center, and everyone working there were social workers, and I immediately found my place on the planet. And so, I worked there for a period of time, a decade, and learned from the social workers, and they wanted to grandfather me in, but I said, no, I want to do the coursework like everyone else. So I did, and in doing so, I learned that the principle of affected interest states that those who are affected by policies should have a say in how that policy is developed. Anyway, like I say, I thought we were going to be talking to students here, so my approach to building relationships begins with working with the community, building trust with the community. You've got to do that. It's the first thing you got to do. And then you have to understand and incorporate the lived experiences of the people in the community and build that into your research initiatives. That's where I start with building relationships. I think I had experience working with University of Toronto fellow we worked together on an HIV/AIDS project in Labrador. Ted Myers from University of Toronto. I mean, Dr. Ted Myers, some of you might know her. No, you know? Cool. One of the first things that we decided we needed to do if we're going to do this regional project, 8 Indigenous communities, was to create an advisory committee to oversee it, so that they are in charge of this research project. We asked them for advice. How are we doing? Are we going in the right direction here? Are we getting this right? And it worked really well. So build advisory committees into the community research that you're doing. Be sure to collaborate with community participants every step of the way. Involve the communities in the research, so that there's community buy-in, and clearly explain the research so that the community understands what's going on, right? Oftentimes they'd say, well, they're doing something, they're doing research, they're asking questions, I so-and-so was involved, that kind of thing. Make sure that everybody understands fully. So that's part of building relationship. So there.
Okay. All right. I guess it is my turn now. I mean, certainly the overall observation is relationship building can't be rushed. Much as we're motivated as academics to rush these things along because we're graded on our ability to rush things along. So there's always this tension between, doing it right and, increasing your whatever value, I guess, as a scholar or academic or whatever. But I think, once you get into the field, you're not worried as much about rushing. I guess that's one of the problems is when you're a young academic, I'm not sure you have that option. So there is that tension as well. Maybe I should talk a little bit, since you're going into background material. When I was a bachelor student, I don't think I could have even defined what a social worker was. I was a bachelor student. My interest was really in research. I didn't think I would have the skills to be a even a therapist. I was thinking I'd probably go more into research, possibly therapist. And anyways, things didn't work out, and there's a downturn in the economy. And there, you're kind of looking for job possibilities. And with great reservation, I decided I wanted to, work with children in a child welfare agency, adolescents. And I thought, well, probably the last thing I want to do in life, but let's give it a try. And turned out I really liked it, and that's kind of what changed my trajectory. And increased my interest actually in working with adolescents. Even to this day, I still do a lot of research in that. And I think a lot of that informs also, because then I went into community work, and my understanding of how to do things is almost more born out of community work, about cutting a lot of things out and just do it, make mistakes and see what happens along the way, and you're going to learn much quicker that way anyways, instead of trying to plan things out interminatively and then half the times giving up just because, oh well, we didn't plan it properly, or people gave up because it took too much time. And that's what the course is about. But before I did that, a lot of my community-based work was really as a consultant when I was at McGill. Yes, my title was student, but kind of people looked at me as like, okay, you're a worker, you're a research consultant, basically. Was paid to do that job. I did that before I was a student, and I'm doing the same thing as a student, so I didn't feel as much a student when I was doing that work, and the roles were pretty clear. I think when I go in, they expect a certain thing of me, the research expert. And I understand their role, try to respect their role. They're the clinical experts, and they know what they need in the organization, so we kind of work to achieve that. So there is that ease. But when you get into supple community service learning, not in Jordan's model, which I think is perfectly intelligent for the environment, I just wanted to point that out. I think you need to adapt it. I understand instructors are intelligent enough to know what they need for their environment. They often do a really good job adapting things, and not, don't worry about, trying to mix together a formula that's going to work in every environment. It's not. I think what works well here is, works well here, but it's probably not going to work well in Montreal. You'd really have to adapt it to something different. Probably have to involve graduate students, and it has to be maybe a slightly bigger program. Might even need funding or something else. But it's probably possible. But then the question is it worthwhile? That's a whole other story. Yep.
So in my other role as Associate Dean of Student Affairs in the Faculty of Arts, there are students in other programs that are getting, so there's this desire to get them embedded in the community, this whole idea of community engagement. And it's happening in Quebec studies, it's happening in international development studies, it's happening in gender, feminist, and diversity studies. And so I'm wondering if you can reflect on this whole community service learning approach, thinking about it as, is it something that you see is just about social work, or is it bigger and broader?
Yeah, no, ideally all the social sciences, and even outside of the social sciences, I think, and people are kind of all doing this to some degree in different ways. In archaeology, there's a really interesting public engagement project from Memorial, and it's kind of based on similar principles, that you really need to go out to the community to understand what's needed. Just doing research, in your own institution, you're going to do interesting stuff. You might get published, but you won't necessarily know what's needed, and it's only through that process that you do that. And I think in the end, you get more meaningful and more fulfilling results and implications and transference of knowledge, particularly the last bit. The knowledge transfers a lot more easily. So I think it is the direction we're going in, but within reason. I think it can't be all community service learning. We don't want CSL courses from when we go in to when we leave, and students would probably echo that. It's like, okay, that's enough. Leave us alone with it. So you have to be mindful of also that what you're asking as well of students and the community.
That's a piece that I worry about is the potential for exploitation of
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I know.
Anyway, maybe that's what you were.
That's what I was going to say. I have grave concerns about the proliferation of service learning and experimental education rampantly across the university. We've been doing it a long time in social work. We called it placements,
Yeah.
right? And I think we have a real voice, perhaps in trying to critically engage with how you have relationships in the community that don't get extractive and don't get exploitive. And we take tuition from students, and then we ask the community to fulfill these learning roles. And I believe they are rich and transformative, but we have to figure out how to support communities in a real material and symbolic way if they are going to essentially take on the role of being teachers and instructors in yet another way that we've already been asking them to do as field instructors. So yes, I'm concerned about it. I think we have to spend some time, more of us, thinking and talking about that aloud. Because it often is, it's a very good practice, there's no doubt, but there are things that we have to consider in its
So if you look
unfolding.
at strategic priorities of universities across the country, going from Simon Fraser right across, right, their strategic priorities are articulated as community engagement.
Right.
So I wonder to what extent are you contributing to that critical sort of dialogue with your own administration around it?
I've had many conversations with our VP, now leaving, academic, Noreen Golfman, about the discursive value of community engagement that gets ensconced as a pillar, but then the university does not, again, materially support the actualization of that. So I'm trying to have those conversations in our institution, and I certainly in the previous institution I taught in, we had the same kind of conversations around, because every university's white paper, I did an analysis of white papers in Ontario at various institutions, and community engagement, public engagement is mentioned.
Everywhere.
But there's very little detail about how that might unfold, the ways it would be supported, how we were going to make that happen.
I encourage you to stay on that.
Okay, I know. Have a great trip
Yeah,
back.
I think it's terrific.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So yeah, I mean, certainly that is, I mean, one of the concerns, and that kind of brought in. I'll after I finish, I'll get you to chime in. And the whole idea about having a relatively low ask of the community partners, so they just need to tell us, what do you want us to do, and it's not really taxing them too much. And from the community partner feedback I get, I rarely get people saying, "Oh, it was an overwhelming amount of work." If anything, they sometimes ask for more engagement from the students and more contact from the students. So I've actually added this, the coordinator needs to feel what's going on, whether they need to engage with them more or less, depending on, whether it's a busy organization, they don't have time, that's fine, we'll do the best we can, or whether, no, let's go back and forth and talk about what it is you want and try to refine what it is we're going to give you in the end. So, I think that's one of the advantages of this one, is that it's, it's not this idea of that we want you to train our students kind of thing.
Right.
We do enough of that already.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms going back to relationship, and then the question or a comment. In this particular model, we don't actually see the community partner or talk to them. So they're like these strangers, which is a bit odd. And I guess some people like that or don't like that. But I think it is important to prepare the students to be good diplomats, and because they are representing the university. But I think it makes it possible. You're not going to be training 225 students by trying to, do more, control more. And it's even more so, I think, at McGill. You'd even have to do it more so, this delegation model, where you're not probably going to see many of the community partners, but you're there if they need you, and you get the feedback. But then when the scale-up comes around, then you're seeing the community partner, and then so you have to rebuild this relationship, and that can be problematic and sometimes good, but sometimes bad, because it's almost like this, it's a new relationship now, and different dynamics. I was used to this old relationship, and now it's changed, just like a reconstituted family in many ways. So that's something I think that I've been more mindful of, but it's, there's a certain imperfection. to doing it that way. I agree. Katrine, did you have a comment question?
I have two questions.
Okay.
Just one is technical. Like, is a Supple Community Service Learning program a placement with a
No.
different?
No.
So it's a more short-term engagement.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a.
Students there for a certain amount of time within the context of class work that they're kind of
That's right.
delivering at the
Within
end
a
of the
single
semester.
course.
Yeah, it's a course assignment basically.
Course assignment.
Yeah.
So, a second question, and maybe it wouldn't work well, and I'm not sure that there's a model for this, but I'm wondering if there are any sort of like interdisciplinary or team-based initiatives around Supple Community Service Learning, or even placements, just because, you know, social work students often come in with a very defined set of skills, or they're working on that set of skills, and they're useful, but then, you know, so well, like, be complemented by another set of skills by, you know, students in other departments. Does that exist? Like,
No, I mean, I'm really interested in doing that if we can start engaging with other departments and having these multidisciplinary teams. Instead of just 5 social work students, it could be
Right.
even a larger team.
I think we have a context for doing it with
Yeah.
IPE. We have interprofessional education modules that medicine, nursing, us and psychology. I might be missing someone.
Yeah,
Pharmacy, that's right.
Yeah.
Pharmacy come together on a regular basis to build skill sets together. So that seems like a place that a good place to land and nest the kind of thing you're talking about, because that would be incredibly valuable in real-time learning across disciplinary divides, which we need
Because
a
I
lot.
hate to harp on the data part of things, but that's a lot of what organizations need these days.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of students coming from other departments have the technical skills, but not the conceptual frameworks that we work with in social work. And the complement between them. If I could work with someone who had all the technical skills, and together we could come up with some like really good
Sure.
some material that would be useful, I think that'd be exciting.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's pros and cons with the IP too, because it's a very top-down,
It is.
prepackaged program, and sometimes the students have complaints about the
They do.
way it's put together. I'm not sure we have time to talk about all those complaints.
Right. I mean, yeah.
We have someone
Other
here
aspects,
smiling.
maybe later. But
Probably
yeah, I
can
think we can talk
that.
about IPE.
But that is the reality. But I mean, I can see us doing once we get one other department, that would be interesting just to see how it would work.
Yeah.
Where you have more students going in and a more complex project, and try to keep the ask the same, and which I think is possible. And possibly presenting at multiple classes, because we have students interviewing the community partners and then presenting what they learned to the classroom. Why not present it to 2 classes?
That's the
Put them together.
2021 scale up.
Yeah, it's 2020. I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Was there a second question, or was that the? No,
That was the
okay.
second question.
That was the second question. Okay. Benefits.
Benefits. How did I get first again? I said-
Oh, it's always in the same order, so you know. when
Oh,
you're-
okay.
You know when you're
okay,
up.
here I go. Right. If you haven't heard it already, I have an ethical commitment to community-driven research. I only engage in any kind of knowledge-gathering activities if it arises and is determined, and according to the OCAP protocols, is owned and culminating with the community. So it's nice to participate in the Supple. I've got to really practice that S. Community Service Learning. S. Yeah. Anyway, because it does try to engage and enliven that idea of a community-determined agenda. But having said that, I was reflecting today on Heather Bartlett said, one of the hardest things sometimes is students come to me and say, what area of research? And Heather is left trying to determine that. And so my reflections on that is that, whenever we situate and fix anything in one particular place, maybe that has to be a dialogue. Maybe that has to even be a dialogue with us, students, and our community partners. I mean, it seems like a good gesture to have it community driven, but maybe it doesn't. For some people, that is a really challenging ask. So I'm waffling on that, but certainly I think that's one of the benefits of the CSL in general.
Yep.
And to kind of echo some of the things you said, Jordan, is I really think that this is a way for students to see research in action. I'm convinced that research is one among many tools for social action and transformation, and I think when students doing this really don't see it as it starts to lose its veneer of being a purely academic exercise research and really be a living tool for our social justice projects in the same way that you reframed it as policy in action, so research in action. So those are my two sort of key reflections on benefits. Right.
Right. So one of the things I found, and if I was speaking to other students here now, it would be this whole idea of opportunities to engage in critical thinking and improving your analytical skills, expanding your academic and career interests, other research interests come into play, expanding your knowledge of your chosen research field if you're locked in, you're off and running, and building relationship with other peers, other faculty, both within the community and outside, so networking comes into play. Those are benefits I see for students, budding researchers. So, back to you.
Back to me. Okay. I think, it kind of echoes pretty much what I have to say as well, or I have said in the past. In terms of the conference itself, I think what I like about one benefit that I have that's just kind of top of the mind is from this project is that bachelor students do tend to present more user-friendly summaries. They're more accessible to an audience as opposed to graduate students and faculty, where it becomes more and more complex, more and more driven by methodology, or more, there's this more intense kind of, this is why it's important, it's this detail. So that's what I like about it anyways. So it kind of brings me back to that idea, what does it mean? What are the implications? One thing I really loved about this conference is everybody was almost mindful of that. What are the implications? What does it all mean? I think that's the common thing. So really, I think we achieved a lot in that sense. And certainly, the same thing, I think. The question is, will it increase their research involvement throughout their career? And I think it will. But that's something, it's a longitudinal study that we're way at really at the beginning. We'll never know for quite a while. But at the end of the day, the students will replace us. We see the people that are going to replace us right in front of them, working hard for them, to give them the skills to replace us. But that is the natural thing to do. I think that has good external validity. When we talk about community-based research, I know that's a technical term, and transferability is too. But I think one of the things I write in papers, and I do agree, is that we're talking about things that are happening in the real world. Sometimes when you do research at the university, it's a bit too artificial to actually be usable in the community, because we don't always think about all the things that go wrong in the community, or go sideways in the community, or go right in the community, and we're underestimating what can be done. So I like, that's what I like about working in the community on projects that they often design, or projects that they want, and then I'm just basically, like I said, I'm a consultant to help realize that project. Yeah. Should we move on?
Yeah.
Sure.
Now we got to talk about the bad challenges.
So my experience, particularly this year with the community service learning assignments for students, is many students with their partners organizations had a deep desire to engage with service users because of knowing that, while partnering with the professionals that are employed by these organizations is important, there are other knowledges to be gathered, and as service users was one of them. And that introduces a lot of risks and ethical quagmires for us to navigate. And I'm trying to think about that. But rather than talking about that, I'll actually go back to my work as a community-based participatory action researcher and collaborating with people with direct experiences of homelessness, let's say in psychiatrist systems. We started out very much...
Sorry about that. There we go.
very, very much of the vein of wanting to really open up discussion of people with lived experience, telling first-person narratives. We did a lot of speakers bureaus. We went into hospitals, etc., and talked about our collaborative research together. And the folks that identified as peer researchers would often speak from a first-person place. And we often talk about giving voice, etc. But over time, what I learned from those collaborations over 5 or 6 projects is that it's incredibly risky to speak from a first-person narrative. And literally, I can share with you, one person lost their housing as a result of in a policy forum with political actors and policy actors from the Municipal Housing Corporation, disclosed something and lost their housing as a direct result. So that's like a sort of a little move. And I think we have to have that same sort of vigilance if we're going to engage with service users in CSL. And the other thing that we learned over time was, for instance, the way those narratives would be taken up was in very individualizing ways. So the problem would be located in the individual rather than the system's failures. And those kinds of narratives tend to situate those failures in individuals rather than systems. So we moved on and shifted and told composite stories. So they would be based on people's lived expertise, as we started to call it, but they would never be located entirely in one body. So those risks were mitigated, and we had control to shine the lens up at the system's failures. So I just think that those same kind of considerations and learnings that I had from doing community-based research, I need to think about when I think about should we begin to open up these community service learning assignments to engagements with service users, not just service providers. So that's a challenge that I'd like to highlight. I've already spoken about uneven material and symbolic support for our community partners, but I do want to talk a little bit about the differential valuing and priorities that we have around certain sites of knowledge. And to get really clear and simple about it is many community partners just did not want a research synthesis. It's built in, and now I know, Stephen, because you really want to be a researcher and not a social worker. It's sort of built into the context the way it is right now, that research capacity is the capacity that our community partners want to build. But I've learned, and it's talking to students, that there are other kind of capacities that these organizations would like us to do. And that's been a real challenge, navigating that and thinking about what that might look like. I will share, in my class, one group of students ended up doing posters, designing posters to outreach to sex workers. And it was informed by research, but really the ask from the community partners, we need inclusive, accessible outreach resources. And that went ahead. Another group of students was asked to optimize the website for a local food bank. That didn't go ahead because we couldn't navigate the learning and the particular contributions social workers would make to optimizing a website, which might be better with an IT student. So that one didn't go ahead. So here I'm just trying to flag the complexity of thinking about how fluid is our community partner, the ask, and how we navigate it if it exceeds a research synthesis. So I want to put that out on the table.
Yeah, no, it sounds like we need a team to quickly make on-the-spot decisions. This is a go or no go.
Well, yeah, no, it's complex, and I welcome anybody, any kind of input on how to navigate that, or whether we stay fixed in it's a research synthesis. And that's,
Well, it sounds like you'll have an experience to tell us that is like research informed, but not centered in research.
Right. Yeah.
I don't see a reason why they.
Right.
I mean, we certainly have to think about the consequences, but ultimately, I think if it's a good learning experience, why wouldn't we do it?
Right. Yeah, that's a business of valuing different kinds of knowledges and ways of
what is it?
producing and translating and knowledge.
Because it is still a course. We don't want to fail that duty.
No.
Otherwise,
I feel a sidebar conversation coming up.
Okay, never mind.
Over beers or coffee. Sorry, Fred.
Beer's
Go ahead,
better.
Fred.
Okay, so again, speaking to students, it's actually getting them to start the research, and you do it by immersing them in the data, or having them immerse themselves in the data to get the feel of, yes, this is what I want to do. Managing time, huge issue. Frequently it involves dollars and travel and arranging in advance, setting up interviews and perhaps focus groups. It often includes the whole gamut. Be sure to select the right methodology that's going to work for a given research notion or idea or initiative. Listen to what the data tells you once it starts to come in, once it starts to appear. What is it telling you? And it's often really exciting because, oh my God, I didn't realize, I wasn't expecting this, that sort of thing. And be sure to account for bias. So.
Thank
Next.
you. Yeah, no, and I appreciate it. I think in Claire's presentation, just understanding the potential bias of Health Canada research on cannabis, I think it highlights that even when you're doing a synthesis, you have to account for bias.
Yeah.
So I thought that was good. Yeah, it's my turn, is it?
Yeah.
Minor challenges, but in many ways they're realities as well. I mean, it is about sussing the motivation, so I think we already kind of hammered that out, that you do need that sensitivity to see, but especially for scaling up, is this going to work? Are they motivated to do that?
Yeah.
And the motivation of students, and then I think that almost is what guides what you're, how you're going to scale up a project, because you're going to get a bunch of projects, and which one do you scale up? In Jordan's case, you just scale them all up, and that makes it a lot easier. But in our case, it's not going to work. And McGill would even be less so if they did that. Then, how do we scale up, and what do we scale up, if we scale up at all? I think would be a big question. And just being happy that most are short-term partnerships, and that's what most people want. That's what most students want, and that's what most community partners want. They're just happy with this synthesis, and even if it doesn't tell them anything necessarily new, they have the research to support what they're going to say to their funders or to whoever. They have the evidence to back up what they want to say. So I think that, and more often than not, community partners, that's what they tell me. That's all they want. It's like, yeah, no, I didn't learn anything new, which is a bit disappointing for students sometimes, but it does help them in their way, in the way that they want. When it does work, that is. But I find, we have very few experiences, but it does work when the students and community partners have vested interest. So there's something there that is keeping them interested in this project. And sometimes it's just a sub-team that is capable of completing a scale-up on their own. So there was this partnership, but then there's just this sub-team that's going to move on and publish a professional paper or something like that. And I think that's, those are the two ways of scaling up a project, I think, that work. Okay. Sustainability, I guess we'll go through, because we are getting towards the end, so we'll do quick thoughts.
Yep.
Okay, that. Oh.
Is that a
That's
deep
not
thought?
my thought. Oh, maybe it is my thought. I think we've already had a conversation about the difference between a CSL and a placement, and making that determination and that argument vis-a-vis Jordan and my question, so I won't go there. I think I would like to just highlight this notion of deep participation, and this probably comes more from my experience as a community-based researcher and my doctoral work on the social relations of community engagement, is that there's this notion, and I think, Katrina, you talked about collaboration versus consultation, and I don't disagree with you entirely on that. But I think we've become very fixated on the idea of deep participation, and that often translates into everybody doing everything. And I think that is not sustainable, and it doesn't recognize the very different skills, assets, and priorities we bring to these collaborations. So going back to a notion of complementarity rather than everybody doing everything, and being really clear on that. So while I'm a big fan of inviting people to participate, I also have witnessed how that can be very onerous, and I've spoken about that. So I think that really is a piece that I would like to end with. And I'd also like to end with one other observation, we are out there doing research, and I've already flagged that some of our community partners and our students don't always see research as the only form of community practice. And since this is, in our case and not Jordan's case, our CSL is housed and nested within a community practice or community development course, I wonder about the sustainability in that aspect. Is it in the right house? I'm not sure. And I know you've talked about the scaffolding from the research course to this, but I think some thinking about maybe that's why that's percolating up, because it's nested in a community practice course.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Community development.
Well, I don't say the D word, and I won't go on about that.
Okay.
Make sure you do that in the course, though, because then they'll say, "What are you talking about?"
No.
Here it's okay.
Okay, so we want our students as potential researchers to be very careful about hoping that something's going to become sustainable when the actual problem or problem area it isn't the right fit, and it just blows up in your face. Not the case with any of the presentations here today, but it is a risk. So we want to avoid that in terms if we're thinking about sustainability. We want to ensure that the research addresses the actual need for change, right? Because you're fixated on sustainability for it, but is it actually happening? Can it actually happen in terms of sustainability? Ensure that the research is going to help to transform existing community problems and practices. That needs to happen. You need to focus on the improvement of the lives of participants, if we're thinking in terms of sustainability. Ensure that build assurances into our research that tracks sustainability that we're moving towards, and ensure that the methodologies that we're using are actually methodologies that promote sustainability or efficiency. That's how we move towards it.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah. There are no students left.
Oh, there are.
One,
Haley
two.
and these guys are
Two.
students.
Okay,
Becky
sorry.
and Bianca. You're a
And
student.
Katrina.
You're a PhD student. Haley's a BSW.
And Jordan. So pretty much everybody,
And
And
actually.
Jordan, yes, Sarah.
We're the
are you-
non-students. We're the only
No,
non-students
I'm
here.
still a student.
Okay.
I'm
well,
studying.
So there's only, it's just
Yes.
me and you. Well, you're a student then.
Different.
Yes.
It's just me. Okay.
See? Those identities. Fixing those identities.
Well, you're still in school, so.
Yeah. Certainly what I've read in the literature is, that CSL, one of the biggest issues is they wind down after the funding is over, or they just wind down of their own natural impetus.
Fizzles
They peter out. And I think that is a reality. And that's why I worry about, thinking of sustainability as being the true measure of success, because you're basically setting yourself up for failure in the most of the cases. I don't say that's going to be the case in our program, but I also am realistic, and at some point maybe it will move on to something different, and you kind of have to accept that, just like the circle of life. Things go away, and not that I want that to happen, but I think I'm trying to do the best I can for today. And I find sometimes sustainability is one of those academic terms, and to sometimes even a somewhat neoliberal term, that we have to worry about that. Without questioning, what does that mean, sustainability? Particularly in this case, are we talking about sustainability of the education, or the research skills in the students, or the community partners? Are we talking about the
Relationships.
relationships between the community partners and the academic partners? Or are we talking about the sustainability of CSL in the school? There's a lot of different things, but I know at some point it won't be sustainable if if I start engaging in a certain number of research projects, well, then I won't be able to engage in any more if they're sustainable, if they become, you know, after 3 or 4 projects, what am I going to do? Am I going to take more? Probably not. So I think to some degree you have to live for today. I know that sounds like a
It's the
horrible
same
thing.
phenomenon in our
Yeah.
research projects once
Yeah.
the funding dries up, right? And
Yeah.
how do you
Mhm.
sustain
Absolutely.
the work and the relationships after that?
So, I mean, what I'm looking in the here and now is, the quality of the work, which is what we do anyways, because we're instructors. So we get to do that without even being asked to do it. We're obliged to do it. And where does it, where does it go? Who's reading or making use of this? And I mean, if you evaluate your program, that kind of success, you're way up there in terms of success. I can't imagine any better success for a community service learning program. And does it need to be sustainable in 10 years? No, what you did in that, in that 2 years, I think is a great success. So, I think we do have to pat ourselves on the back and not knock ourselves down because of that sustainability, the S word, I think. And certainly, the involvement of community partners, the fact that it results in funding applications or presentations to the UN. I'm not going to put that as a barometer for my class. I think I'll leave that one alone. But nevertheless, I think it can be very qualitative in this sense, that we just need to kind of use our experience and our judgment to decide, is it a success? Did it do what I wanted it to do? Yeah. And that's it for me. Do we have any other final thoughts, Fred?
No.
Julia?
No, just to thank you for being here with us at the end of the day. I
Yeah.
really want to thank you for that.
And wonderful
And
presentations.
thank you, Haley, for your assistance. Yeah.
Yeah, and the posters too.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
We're
Thank
done.
you.
Done.